The Hangar mishap that started it all. The Xilarian Federation starship Hangar 12 was a massive structure, filled with towering ships, humming machinery, and thousands of workers rushing to prepare the fleet for deployment. The air smelled of hot metal and plasma exhaust. Among the workers was Lieutenant David Carter, a human engineer, one of the few allowed to work on Xilarian warships. Humans were not respected in the Federation. They were considered less advanced, weaker, and only useful for basic labor. While Xilarians and other alien races handled important work, humans were stuck cleaning engine parts, moving crates, and running diagnostics on minor systems. David didn't mind. He wasn't here to impress anyone. He just loved fixing things. A normal day. Until everything went wrong. David was in the middle of running a system check on a gravity stabilizer when he heard shouting. "Move! Get out of the way!" He turned and saw a massive cargo pod, loaded with highly unstable plasma cores, falling from its support frame. A malfunction in the magnetic locks had caused the pod to break loose, and now it was plummeting straight toward the main reactor chamber of the HFY Sci-Fi, the largest and most powerful warship in the fleet. If that pod crashed, the entire hangar would explode, taking half the fleet with it. The Xilarians panicked. Xilarian workers screamed and ran, some diving behind control panels, others rushing toward the emergency exits. High-ranking officers stood frozen, unable to react fast enough. David did the calculations in his head. The pod would hit the reactor in less than 10 seconds. The explosion would be instantaneous. He glanced at the emergency gravity override controls nearby. It was damage from a previous repair job. No one had bothered to fix it. One human against certain death. David didn't think, he acted. He ran straight toward the falling cargo pod. Xilarians shouted at him to stop. "Human, you will die," one officer yelled. But David wasn't listening. He leaped onto a maintenance platform, grabbed a loose gravity stabilizer clamp, and activated it manually. His plan was insane. The stabilizer wasn't designed for this kind of weight, but it was the only chance. If he could just redirect the gravity field, he could slow the fall long enough for someone to activate the emergency stabilizers. The pod was seconds from impact when David slammed the override switch. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a loud hum, the stabilizer engaged. The pod's fall slowed, but it was still descending, just at a much slower speed. David's arms shook with effort as he held the controls steady. He could feel the metal heating up under his grip. "Come on, hold together," he muttered through gritted teeth. The stabilizer overloaded, sending sparks flying in all directions. A shockwave knocked David off his feet, sending him crashing onto the metal floor. A deadly silence. A hangar fell silent. The massive cargo pod had come to a halt, now hovering just inches above the reactor chamber. The entire fleet had just avoided destruction because of one human. David lay on his back, staring at the ceiling, breathing heavily. His arms ached, his head throbbed, and his clothes were covered in soot. Then the Xilarians surrounded him. Captain Vorektal, the Xilarian in charge of Hangar 12, stepped forward, staring down at the human. His 4 glowing eyes were filled with disbelief. "You did this?" the captain asked, his voice quiet. David coughed and pushed himself into a sitting position. "Yeah," he said. "You're welcome." The Xilarians exchanged nervous glances. Some looked impressed, others angry, and a few looked downright terrified. The aftermath. And the beginning of something bigger. The alarm lights flashed as security teams arrived. Technicians hurried to secure the cargo pod, while officers rushed to check the damage report. But the real damage was not to the ship. It was to the Federation's pride. No Xilarian had been able to stop the disaster. No highly trained alien engineer had been fast enough, smart enough, or brave enough. Only a human had acted. Captain Vorektal narrowed his eyes at David. "You disobeyed protocol," he said slowly. "You risked your life recklessly." David shrugged. Yeah. And the Excelarian studied him for a long moment. Then, to everyone's shock, he let out a deep, rumbling laugh. Interesting, Vorektal murmured. The other Excelarians didn't know what to say. David Carter had just become the most talked-about human in the entire fleet, and he had no idea that this one small hangar mishap was about to change his destiny forever. The impossible feat. The hangar was still recovering from the shock of what had just happened. The emergency alarms had finally stopped blaring, leaving behind a deep, unsettling silence. Solarian engineers were scrambling like insects, securing the suspended cargo pod that had almost destroyed the ship. The air still crackled with residual plasma static, and the scent of burned metal hung thick. Yet, in the middle of all this chaos, one figure stood out. David Carter, a mere human engineer, sitting on the floor, covered in soot, breathing heavily. The entire crew had just witnessed something impossible. A human, using nothing but his brain and quick reflexes, had saved the fleet's flagship, something no one else had been able to do. A new reality sets in. Captain Vorektal, still staring at David, couldn't believe what he had just witnessed. Humans were supposed to be slow, weak, and insignificant. That's what the Federation always said. Yet here was this low-ranked engineer who had just done something that should have been beyond human ability. Vorektal's second-in-command, a tall, six-limbed Excelarian named Commander Xylor, finally spoke. This human should be dead. David groaned, rolling his shoulders. Yeah, I get that a lot. Murmurs rippled through the Excelarian crew. Some whispered about luck. Others whispered about foul play. But the truth was clear. No one else had even tried to stop the disaster. Only the human had acted. And that changed everything. Not everyone is impressed. Not all the Excelarians were happy. One of the senior engineers, Rilvask, a Excelarian with dark green scales and a reputation for arrogance, stepped forward, sneering. This was a trick. His voice dripped with suspicion. No human could calculate a gravity override this fast. No human could react this quickly. You must have sabotaged the pod yourself. David blinked. I what? Vorektal's eyes flashed dangerously. He turned his massive head toward Rilvask. Are you accusing this human of treason? The captain asked, his voice sharp. Rilvask hesitated, but then pointed a clawed finger at David. I am saying that no primitive species could have pulled off what he just did. Either he sabotaged it, or he's lying about how he stopped it. David, exhausted, exhaled slowly and dragged a hand down his face. Oh, for the love of... If I sabotaged it, why would I almost get myself killed stopping it? The Solarians didn't know how to respond. Even Rilvask seemed to hesitate, realizing the flaw in his logic. But before anyone could say more, a deep mechanical voice rumbled through the hangar speakers. An unexpected summons. Lieutenant Carter. The entire hangar froze. The voice belonged to Admiral Xovek, Supreme Commander of the Excelarian Fleet. The Admiral rarely spoke directly to anyone, much less a human engineer. David blinked. Oh, that can't be good. You are to report to the Galactic Council chamber immediately, the voice continued. Your actions have gained attention. A silence heavier than deep space followed. David glanced around at the hundreds of Solarians staring at him, some with awe, some with resentment, and some with pure disbelief. Then he shrugged. Guess I better go see what this is all about, he muttered, pushing himself up. Vorektal's eyes narrowed as he looked at David. Then something unexpected happened. The Excelarian captain gave a slow, approving nod. David Carter had no idea that he had just taken his first step toward becoming a legend. But the rest of the galaxy was about to find out. The human problem solver. David Carter wasn't sure what was more uncomfortable, the fact that hundreds of Solarians were staring at him like he was some kind of glitch in reality, or the fact that he had just been summoned by the Galactic Council, a place where humans had no authority, no power, and no voice. A human engineer in the council chamber. That had never happened before. As he followed the heavily armored guards out of Hangar 12, David let out a slow breath. All right, Carter. No pressure. Just the most powerful aliens in the galaxy wanting a chat. What's the worst that could happen? The Xelarian guards didn't laugh. They never laughed. Arrival at the council chamber. The Galactic Council chamber was nothing like the grease-stained hangars David was used to. The walls glowed with holographic displays, shifting and shimmering as they projected live fleet reports, planetary surveillance, and encrypted military transmissions. Rows of high-ranking officers, alien politicians, and Federation elites sat in elevated platforms, their reptilian, insectoid, and mammalian forms casting judgmental glares as David stepped onto the cold, metallic floor. In the center, seated on an obsidian throne, was Admiral Ksovek, Supreme Commander of the Federation fleet. His silver-scaled exosuit gleamed, his 4 crimson eyes unblinking as he studied David. David stopped walking and gave a casual salute, which probably looked ridiculous in this setting. Lieutenant Carter, reporting as requested, sir. No idea why I'm here, but hey, always nice to get out of the hangar. A few murmurs rippled through the council members, some of them clearly irritated by his informal tone. Ksovek, however, remained silent for a moment before finally speaking. You are a mechanic. David nodded. Yep, and a pretty good one, I'd say. Yet today, you prevented a catastrophe that should have been beyond your species' abilities. David tilted his head. I dunno, sir. Kinda just seemed like basic physics to me. That got a reaction. Some of the aliens leaned forward. Others whispered in their strange, guttural languages. Ksovek's clawed fingers tapped against the armrest of his throne. Basic physics. Ksovek repeated, almost amused. The calculations you performed in seconds, our best engineers would have required minutes. David shrugged. Guess humans just work better under pressure. This time, silence. No one had an answer to that. Not everyone is happy. Seated on the left side of the council chamber was Admiral Slivak, a Xelarian who had always been against humanity's inclusion in the Federation. His sharp, angular face was twisted in a sneer as he leaned forward. This is exactly what I feared, Slivak said coldly. These humans have no discipline, no respect for protocol. This on, he gestured toward David, defied orders, risked Federation property, and is now being treated like some kind of hero. David crossed his arms. Hey, I saved your worship, buddy. A thank you wouldn't kill you. Slivak's eyes narrowed dangerously. But before he could respond, Admiral Ksovek raised a hand, silencing the room. What I see is a human who did what no one else in that hangar could do, Ksovek said. His tone was neutral, but the weight of his words carried through the chamber. And that is a problem. David blinked. Wait, how is that a problem? The true reason for the summons. Ksovek stood from his throne. Lieutenant Carter, he said, you have just demonstrated an ability that challenges everything the Federation has believed about your kind. The fact that a human engineer could outthink, outreact, and outmaneuver our elite officers means we must reconsider humanity's role in our society. David frowned. So, what you guys finally realize we're not useless. That's great news. What's the catch? Ksovek's 4 glowing eyes locked onto him. The catch, human, is that we now must decide whether your species is an asset to the Federation or a threat to its balance. David froze. Wait. What? The choice. The chamber was dead silent. David, standing alone in the center, realized something. This wasn't just about him. This was about all humans. The Xelarians had always seen Earth as a minor species, good for labor, but not for leadership. But now, thanks to one small act of human ingenuity, the Federation was questioning everything. And not everyone liked that. You will be given a choice, Ksovek continued. You may return to your former duties, or you may accept a position within the Federation's elite fleet operations team, where your talents will be tested in ways you cannot imagine. David let out a slow breath. He could feel the eyes of the council on him, waiting, judging. Go back to engine work, or step into the unknown. Then he grinned. I always wanted a promotion. The council chamber erupted into chaos. Some aliens shouted in protest. Others debated furiously. But David, he just shoved his hands in his pockets and smiled. The game had changed, and the galaxy never saw it coming. The jealous rivals and the hidden threat. The moment David Carter accepted the offer, the Galactic Council chamber exploded into chaos. Some aliens shouted in outrage, others whispered in shock, and a few sat completely silent, watching everything unfold. David, standing in the middle of it all, couldn't help but smirk. Wow, you'd think I just declared war. Admiral Slyvac slammed his fist onto his podium. His reptilian scales glowed under the dim blue lights. This is an insult to the Federation. A mere human mechanic elevated to our most elite ranks. This is madness. David shrugged. Hey, you guys asked me to join. I'm just rolling with it. Sovak raised a hand, and silence fell once more. Enough. His voice was calm but carried absolute authority. He turned his 4 glowing eyes to David. Lieutenant Carter, you are hereby assigned to Special Fleet Operations. You will report to Station Theta 7 for immediate deployment. David raised an eyebrow. Theta 7? Never heard of it. Sovak's expression remained unreadable. You were not supposed to. For the first time, David felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just a promotion. This was something much bigger, a dangerous welcome. David's transport arrived at Theta 7, a massive classified space station hidden within the Veil Nebula, far from any major trade routes. Unlike the polished, high-tech Federation structures he had seen before, Theta 7 was built like a fortress. As David stepped off the shuttle, he was met by a Solarian officer with deep red scales and piercing black eyes. You must be the human. David smiled. And you must be the welcome committee. The officer didn't smile back. My name is Commander Veshtal. I do not care for pleasantries, and I do not trust you. You are here because Admiral Sovak forced our hand. David sighed. Great, a fan. Veshtal's eyes flashed with something dangerous. You will regret accepting this position, human. A test of survival. David was given no time to settle in. Immediately, he was thrown into an intense combat and strategy test, competing against Solarian elites, Signorian tacticians, and even an AI combat drone. The challenge: survive a simulated fleet battle against impossible odds. The catch: if he lost, he'd be permanently reassigned as a janitor. David sat in the command chair of a holographic worship simulation, rubbing his temples. So let me get this straight. If I win, you all hate me even more. And if I lose, I get to mop floors. Veshtal smirked. Exactly. The simulation began. Within seconds, David's fleet was surrounded. 15 enemy ships closed in. The Exilarian elites watched from the observation deck, already expecting him to fail. David exhaled. Time to make them regret this. The human tactic they never expected. The enemy ships opened fire. Instead of dodging or raising shields, David did something no one expected. He shut down his ship's engines entirely. For a moment, the Solarians watching froze in confusion. Veshtal scowled. The fool has surrendered. Then it happened. The enemy fleet adjusted its trajectory, expecting an easy kill. That's when David reactivated the engines, in full reverse. The enemy fleet, moving too fast to stop, overshot their attack vectors, leaving their backs completely exposed. David unleashed a full spread of missiles, hitting critical systems and destroying 3 enemy ships in seconds. Gasps echoed across the station. The tide had turned. The unexpected victory. Within minutes, David had outmaneuvered and wiped out the enemy fleet, using tactics the Federation had never seen before. The simulation ended. The room was silent. Then, a slow, deliberate clap echoed from the observation deck. David looked up to see Admiral Ksovak watching him with amusement. Veshtal, however, was fuming. This was luck. David smirked. Nah, it's called thinking differently. You guys should try it sometime. The hidden threat emerges. Just as things were getting interesting, the station's emergency alarms blared. The room's holographic display flickered, then changed to a real-time alert. Theta 7 was under attack. David frowned. Is this part of the test? Veshtal's expression darkened. No. On the hologram, dozens of ships emerged from the darkness of space, unmarked, cloaked, and moving with terrifying precision. A fleet no one had seen before. David felt the weight of the moment sink in. Something was very, very wrong. And for the first time since arriving, the Xilarians looked at David not with scorn, but with urgency. Because now, they needed him. The human versus the unknown enemy. The emergency alarms wailed across Theta 7, sending every crew member into a state of controlled panic. Security barriers slammed down, defensive turrets emerged from the walls, and ships within the hangar were scrambling to take off. David Carter watched the holographic display in the command center, his arms crossed. A fleet of unknown ships had just appeared out of nowhere, cloaked, silent, and already moving toward attack positions. So, does anybody here know who these guys are? David asked, glancing at the Xilarian officers. Veshtal, still fuming from David's simulation victory, clenched his jaw. No known Federation enemy uses these ship designs. Their hulls are reinforced with an unknown material. David pointed at the glowing red markers on the tactical display. Well, they sure don't look friendly. Then, Admiral Ksovak's booming voice filled the chamber. Theta 7 is now in Defsion Omij. This station does not fall. Asterisk asterisk. A ripple of strict military discipline washed over the Xilarian officers. But despite their training, David could tell, they were nervous. Theta 7 was deep in restricted Federation space. This station was secret, hidden even from most Federation citizens. So how did the enemy find them? David's gut twisted. Something was very wrong. A fight unlike any other. The first shots were fired. Bright green energy lances ripped through the void, smashing against Theta 7's shield barriers. The station shook, warning lights flickering as impact forces rattled the hull. David saw the defensive fleet launching, squadrons of Xilarian fighters swarming into formation. The Federation ships opened fire, unleashing precision plasma rounds toward the enemy. And that's when David saw something terrifying. The enemy ships didn't dodge. They let the attacks hit them, and instead of taking damage, the plasma shots bent around their hulls, like water flowing over a rock. That's not normal, David muttered. Ksovak narrowed his four glowing eyes. Some kind of energy redirection technology. Our weapons are ineffective. David rubbed his temples. Okay, so let me get this straight. We don't know who they are. We don't know what they want. And we can't even hurt them. Veshtal's voice was grim. That is correct. David exhaled sharply. Fantastic. A human solution. David scanned the battle screen, watching the enemy move in strange, synchronized patterns, avoiding direct engagement, but pushing Theta 7 into a corner. And then it hit him. They weren't fighting to win. They were hurting the Federation forces, guiding them toward something. David's mind raced. What would I do if I were in their position? What's their real goal? Then he saw it. One of the enemy ships broke formation, moving toward the station's lower decks, a sector that held Theta 7's AI core and classified research labs. That's it. David slammed his fist on the table. They're not here to destroy the station. They're here to steal something. The room fell dead silent. Ksovak's expression didn't change, but David saw the subtle tension in his posture. Explain. David pointed at the battle screen. They're attacking in a pattern that keeps your forces distracted. But look here, this ship. It's heading straight for your AI core. My guess, they want to take control of Theta 7 from the inside. Veshtal stared at the display, realization dawning in his eyes. By the void, he whispered. The human is right. David smirked. Get used to it, buddy. The mission no one wanted to take. Sovak turned to his officers. Deploy countermeasures to the lower decks. Send the Omega security teams. Veshtal's jaw tightened. There's a problem, Admiral. David frowned. Oh, great. What now? Veshtal pointed at the display. That ship is carrying a cloaked infiltration unit. They'll be inside the station in less than 2 minutes. Omega security won't get there in time. David stared at the Xelarians. So what? We just let them waltz in and steal your secrets. No one answered. David threw up his hands. Unbelievable. You guys really do suck at improvising. Then, before anyone could stop him, he grabbed a pulse rifle from a nearby weapons locker. The room went dead silent again. Veshtal's jaw dropped. What are you doing? David checked the rifle's energy levels and slung it over his shoulder. I'm going down there. Someone's got to stop them. Sovik's expression remained unreadable. You are not a soldier. David grinned. Neither were the guys who built Apollo 11. But they still got us to the moon. Veshtal was about to protest, but Sovak raised a hand. Let him go. David blinked. Wait, seriously. Sovak nodded. You seem to have a habit of proving us wrong, human. Let's see if you can do it again. David smirked. Well, if I don't come back, tell everyone I died of Vadis. And with that, he sprinted toward the elevator, headed straight for the fight no one else wanted to take. Into the unknown. The elevator doors hissed shut, taking David down to the lower decks. The moment they opened, he was greeted by the sound of gunfire and explosions. A squad of cloaked enemy soldiers had already breached the corridors, moving fast and precise. Their armor shimmered, making them almost invisible, their weapons firing silent, deadly energy rounds. David dove behind cover, gripping his rifle. Okay, Carter. Time to prove that humans aren't just good at fixing things. He leaned out, took aim, and fired. The first shot dropped an enemy soldier instantly. The second barely grazed another, but it was enough to disrupt their cloaking field. The enemy hesitated. David grinned. Surprised. You guys aren't the first to underestimate humans. The fight was on. The final stand of a human legend. The corridor was alive with chaos. Gunfire ripped through the metal walls, sending sparks raining from overhead pipes. Shadows flickered as invisible infiltrators phased in and out of view, moving too fast for the Xelarian security forces to track. David pressed his back against the cold steel, pulse rifle clutched tight, his heart hammering in his chest. This wasn't a war zone. It was a slaughter. The Xelarians had never fought an enemy like this before, an enemy that moved like ghosts, that turned their own security systems against them, that had planned every step of this attack. And David wasn't even supposed to be here. He exhaled, adjusting his grip. All right, Carter. Time to make some bad decisions. A human in the middle of a nightmare. David peeked out from cover, catching a glimpse of the enemy soldiers. Cloaked figures, their armor shimmering with a strange black energy field, their movements precise and inhuman. Who the hell were these guys? A Xelarian officer tried to launch an energy grenade, but before he could even press the trigger, a sharp red beam of light cut through his chest. David winced. Oof, that's gotta hurt. He ducked again, reloading his rifle. His brain was moving 1,000,000 miles per second. He couldn't outgun them. He couldn't outrun them. So that meant he had to outthink them. The insane plan no one saw coming. David scanned the area, his eyes locking onto a nearby plasma conduit. one of the station's primary energy lines. If he could overload it, the surge would pulse through the walls, disrupting their cloaking tech for a few seconds. It wasn't much, but it was just enough. David smirked. All right, let's break some rules. The gambit. David vaulted over cover, sprinting toward the plasma conduit. A storm of gunfire chased after him, red and green streaks of energy slicing through the air. He skidded to a stop, pulling a maintenance override panel off the wall. Sparks flew as he ripped out the safety limiters, forcing a massive energy surge through the system. Warning lights flashed red. Then, boom! A pulse of white-hot energy exploded through the corridor. The cloaked infiltrators screamed as their stealth fields flickered and failed, revealing them for the first time. David grinned. Gotcha. The human strikes back. Before the infiltrators could react, David opened fire, his pulse rifle sending high-energy rounds tearing through their ranks. The Solarian security forces saw their chance and joined the fight. The tide of battle shifted in seconds. One infiltrator tried to reactivate his cloaking system, but David tackled him to the ground, slamming the barrel of his rifle under his chin. Let's see your fancy tech save you now. A single shot. The infiltrator collapsed, lifeless. The final push. The enemy was retreating, their advantage gone. But David wasn't done yet. He grabbed a fallen enemy's wrist device, quickly scanning its interface. It was a holographic command module, still connected to their main fleet. A thought clicked in David's head. If they could use this to hack into Theta-7 systems, then I can hack them back, turning the enemy's weapons against them. David plugged the device into the station's control terminal, his fingers flying over the interface. He wasn't a hacker, but he was a mechanic. And mechanics, they knew how to break things. The infiltrators' retreating forces froze mid-step. Their weapons powered down. Their ships in orbit lost control, spiraling into defensive maneuvers they hadn't initiated. David had taken control of their systems. The enemy's terrifying last words. A deep, synthetic voice crackled through the comms, distorted and unnatural. You do not understand what you have done, human. David leaned back, wiping sweat from his forehead. Yeah, I get that a lot. We were never here to fight you. We were here to warn you. David's smirk faded. What? The voice continued. They are coming, and when they arrive, you will wish it was us instead. Then, the infiltrators self-destructed, every single one of them. Aftermath. The beginning of something bigger. The battle was over. Theta-7 was still standing. David had just done the impossible again. As the smoke cleared, Admiral Ksovak arrived, his crimson eyes scanning the battlefield. He looked at David, and for the first time, there was something new in his expression. Respect. What did they mean? David asked, his voice quieter now. Who's coming? Ksovak exhaled slowly. I do not know. But deep down, David could feel it. Something far worse was on the horizon, and he had just accidentally put himself in the center of it. The birth of a human legend. Theta-7 was still standing, but the scars of battle ran deep. The station's lower decks were wrecked, security systems were still rebooting, and the air smelled of scorched metal and burnt circuitry. David Carter stood among the ruins, his pulse rifle still hot from combat, his uniform stained with sweat and ash. The infiltrators were gone, but their final words echoed in his mind. They are coming, and when they arrive, you will wish it was us instead. David let out a slow breath. Well, that's ominous.